Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a forest. It's roughly 50,000 BC. The air smells like wood smoke and wet earth. You've got a spear in your hand, dried meat in your gut, and maybe 12 people in the world you actually trust. Your tribe. Your everything. The people you hunt with, sleep near, share fire with. The people whose faces you know so well you can read their mood from 30 feet away in the dark. And then you see it. A figure. On the ridge. Standing still. Watching. Not one of yours. The posture is wrong. The markings are wrong. Everything about this silhouette sends a signal straight to the oldest part of your brain. The part that doesn't speak in words. The part that just screams in pure sensation. Unknown, unverified, dangerous. You have maybe 3 seconds to decide what to do next. And here's the thing nobody tells you about that moment. That 3-second window, that primitive gut punch calculation happening in the back of your skull before you've consciously processed a single thought, that is not ancient history. That is Tuesday morning. That is you, scanning a crowded elevator, clocking a stranger on a dark street, feeling something tighten in your chest when someone you don't recognize walks toward you a little too directly. The circuitry is the same. The stakes are just lower now. Usually. We've spent a lot of time romanticizing our ancient ancestors. Either they were noble savages living in perfect harmony with nature, greeting every stranger with open arms and a spiritual connection to the earth. Or they were bloodthirsty brutes clubbing everything that moved. Neither of those is true. And the real answer, what ancient humans actually did when they saw a stranger, is so much more interesting than either version. Because it wasn't simple. It was a calculation. A social technology developed over hundreds of thousands of years of trial and error, where the cost of getting it wrong was, very often, your life. How you handled a stranger wasn't instinct alone. It wasn't pure aggression. It was a system. A set of behaviors, signals, and protocols that our ancestors developed and refined across thousands of generations. And that system, it turns out, explains a staggering amount about who we are today. It explains why you have friends, why you shake hands, why countries have diplomats instead of just armies, why civilization exists at all. It all comes back to that figure on the ridge, and what happened in the 3 seconds after. Let's start with the myth, because the easy assumption, the one that feels instinctively correct, is that ancient humans killed strangers on sight, that the default setting was violence, that if you weren't from the tribe, you were a target. And look, that wasn't crazy thinking. Strangers were genuinely dangerous. Competing groups fought over territory, over water sources, over hunting grounds. Skeletal remains from prehistoric sites around the world show evidence of violent trauma. Crushed skulls, arrow wounds, blade marks on bone. This was not a peaceful world. Nobody is arguing that. But here's where the story gets complicated. Archaeologists keep finding something that doesn't fit the kill all strangers narrative. Trade goods. Obsidian blades found hundreds of miles from the nearest obsidian source. Shells from coastal regions turning up in inland burial sites. Pigments, tools, and materials that could only have gotten where they were found through one mechanism: contact. Repeated, sustained, intentional contact between groups of people who did not share a campfire. You cannot trade with someone you just killed. Isotopic analysis of ancient bones, a technique that essentially reads the chemical signature of the food and water a person consumed during their lifetime, has revealed something remarkable. A significant percentage of individuals buried in prehistoric sites were not locals. They grew up somewhere else. They moved. They were absorbed into communities that were not their own. Some were likely captives, yes, but many show no signs of trauma. No evidence of a violent end or a constrained life. They just ended up somewhere new and stayed. Which means there was a category beyond us and enemy that ancient humans had to navigate. The stranger who might become something else. A trading partner, a potential spouse, a source of knowledge about terrain, plants, animals, threats that your group didn't have. A stranger, in the right circumstances, wasn't just a threat. A stranger was information. A stranger was opportunity. The math was never simple. Every unknown person on the horizon represented a simultaneous equation: threat or resource, competitor or ally, someone to drive away or someone to pull closer. Getting that calculation wrong in either direction had consequences. Too aggressive and you close off trade routes, trigger retaliatory raids, miss out on the genetic diversity that kept small, isolated populations from collapsing. Too naive, and you end up on the wrong end of that obsidian blade. So the answer wasn't pure violence, and it wasn't open-armed welcome either. It was something much more sophisticated, and much more human. So what was actually happening inside the skull of that prehistoric human staring at a stranger on the ridge? Because this is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Not because the answer is strange and foreign, but because the answer is you, right now, running the exact same hardware. The human brain has a structure called the amygdala. Two of them, actually, one on each side, almond-shaped clusters of neurons buried deep in the temporal lobe. And the amygdala is essentially your internal threat detection system. It processes incoming sensory information before your conscious mind has even registered what it's looking at. Before you have a thought, before you form a word, before you make a decision, the amygdala has already fired, already flagged the situation, already started preparing your body to fight, flee, or freeze. And here is the critical piece. The amygdala responds faster and more intensely to unfamiliar faces than to familiar ones. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable, reproducible neuroscience. Show someone a photograph of a stranger, and their amygdala lights up significantly harder than when they see someone they know. The brain treats an unknown face as a potential threat by default. Not a confirmed threat, a potential one. But the body doesn't always wait for confirmation. Researchers at NYU found that this threat response is even stronger when the stranger belongs to a visibly different social group. The brain isn't just scanning for unfamiliar faces, it's scanning for unfamiliar faces that signal outgroup membership. Different markings, different dress, different physical characteristics associated with people raised in a different environment. The ancient version of this was everything. Skin markings, hairstyles, clothing, body paint, the particular way someone carried a weapon. Your brain was reading all of it simultaneously, running a classification algorithm so fast, you experience it not as analysis, but as gut feeling. That feeling has a name in modern psychology, the outgroup bias. And it is baked into human cognition so deeply that even when people consciously reject it, even when they actively try to override it, traces of it show up in reaction time studies, in implicit association tests, in the millisecond differences between how quickly people process in-group versus out-group faces. We are not talking about learned prejudice here. We are talking about the factory settings. But here is what makes humans genuinely unusual among social animals. We also evolved the capacity to override those factory settings, to pause between the amygdala's first scream and the body's response, to insert something in that gap. That something is what saved us. So what did that pause actually look like in practice? What were the specific behaviors, the physical signals, the protocols that ancient humans developed to navigate the 3 most dangerous seconds of prehistoric life? Because it wasn't improvised, it wasn't random. Across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, humans converged on remarkably similar solutions to the same problem. And we know this because some of those solutions are still being used today. In the 20th century, anthropologists documented dozens of first contact events between modern outsiders and isolated tribes who had never encountered the outside world. People who were, behaviorally speaking, operating on software very close to what our ancestors ran. And what those encounters revealed was not chaos, not immediate violence, not open welcome either. What they revealed was a choreography, a set of moves both sides seem to already know. Distance first. The stranger stops, stays visible, does not advance without a signal. This is not weakness, this is communication. It says, I see you. I am not rushing you. I am giving you time to read me. Then the body. Open hands, raised and visible, no weapons displayed. A posture that makes the body larger in some contexts, smaller and less threatening in others, depending on the specific signal being sent. The details vary by culture. The underlying logic does not. Show me you are not holding something that kills. Then sound, vocalizations that signal non-aggression. Not necessarily words, a particular tone, a rhythm, something that the nervous system on the other end reads not as a growl, but as something closer to a question. Anthropologist David Graeber spent years cataloging these threshold rituals across cultures and found something remarkable. The offer of food appears in nearly every documented first contact protocol across human history, on every continent, in societies with no possible contact with each other. You approach a stranger and you offer them something to eat. because you cannot poison someone and share their food simultaneously. The gesture collapses the threat calculation in a single move. These weren't just polite customs, they were technology, precisely calibrated social tools for taking two nervous systems running maximum threat detection and gradually, carefully walking them both down from the ledge. Your handshake is one of them. The extended open hand, originally a demonstration that you're holding no weapon, compressed into a greeting so routine you do it without thinking. 50,000 years of diplomatic protocol, condensed into 2 seconds and a firm grip. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you cold. Every system we have built, every structure that makes modern human life possible, traces back to what happened when someone decided not to attack. When the amygdala fired and the hand went up, and the stranger on the ridge stayed a stranger for one more minute instead of becoming a casualty. That decision, made by people with no writing, no philosophy, no concept of civilization, no idea what they were starting, that decision is the foundation of everything. Think about what required strangers. Trade required strangers. You cannot build a trade network with people you already know and already have access to. Every obsidian blade that traveled 500 miles, every shell that ended up in an inland burial site, every piece of technology that spread from one population to another, all of it moved through moments of contact between people who had every biological reason to be terrified of each other and chose, or learned, or were forced by circumstance to try something else. Genetic diversity required strangers. Small isolated groups that never absorbed outside members collapsed. The archaeological record is full of them. Dead ends. Populations that vanished not from conquest, but from the quiet mathematics of inbreeding and disease and bad luck, with no outside input to correct the trajectory. The groups that survived, the lineages that eventually became everyone alive today, were the ones that figured out how to occasionally bring the stranger inside the circle. Language spread through strangers. Ideas spread through strangers. Agriculture, one of the most significant technological shifts in human history, did not spread because farmers conquered hunters. It spread because people talked. Because someone on the edge of two worlds watched something working somewhere else and carried the knowledge home. Civilization is not what happens when humans overcome their fear of strangers. Civilization is what happens when humans learn to manage it, to use it. To build systems and rituals and protocols that hold the amygdala's first scream at arm's length long enough for something more interesting to happen. That figure on the ridge is still there, every day, in every city, every office, every interaction with someone whose face your brain has not yet filed under safe. And every time you extend the pause, every time you insert something into that gap between the threat signal and the response, you are doing exactly what your ancestors did. You are choosing, one stranger at a time, to build something instead of end something. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing.